Hello and welcome along to episode 6 of Foxpunter Manager Profiling. Once again, we'll be taking a closer inspection of two of the game's greatest gaffers and using the Myers-Briggs model to figure out their personality types. We'll be taking a look at various aspects of their role and responsibilities, including how they deal with the post-match media duties, more on that later, and how they manage the egos and vastly different needs of their playing squads as well. If you haven't already, please do hit subscribe, and we'll deliver you a brand new podcast straight to your chosen device each and every Monday morning. You can also, of course, go back and listen to our previous episodes with the likes of Steve Evans, Neil Harris, and Lee Bowyer, all featuring. My name is Jack Critchley, and once again, I'm joined by the man who does all the heavy lifting for this podcast. It's Foxpunter's Mike Holden. Mike, hello.
Hello, Jack. How are we doing? You okay?
Yeah, good, thank you. Really good. Looking forward to this one. And we will be touching on, of course, League Two later on, but we've got a bit of a high-profile individual coming up shortly. But before we do, we always like to reflect on the managerial news of the week. And by contrast, it's been a little quieter on the managerial front, perhaps caused by the international break. But just two incomings, Paul Tisdale at Bristol Rovers and Keith Hill. We'll start with him at Tranmere. What did you make of this appointment? To me, it seems to make sense.
Yeah, I'd say so. Keith Hill's got an excellent track record at League Two level, Northwest based. He's done jobs in this area before. He needs to atone a little bit. What happened at Bolton last season wasn't to his liking, wasn't to anyone's liking really. So his reputation's taken a bit of a knock. I think you could say the same for both. Actually, it's the same with Paul Tisdale. The way things went at MK Dons. Two interesting managers, and two of the most engaging managers to listen to in terms of the interviews that they give. Both give very good interviews and lots and plenty of insight about what's going on in their minds and what's going on for their team. So it's some interesting times ahead, but two managers whose reputations aren't probably what they were when they were real big hitters at League Two level 4 or 5 years ago, say. They've both been on a bit of a roller coaster since then.
And they've both taken time out of the game ahead of this latest appointment, and that is usually a good thing, isn't it? A bit of time to reflect and work out perhaps what went wrong in their last jobs respectively.
Yeah, usually, and I'd say particularly for managers of their type as well. And I mean, this could even tie in with the main man we're going to talk about today, in Pep Guardiola, in the sense that they all like to go about things a certain way, and their methods that work for them so well in the past aren't necessarily haven't worked more recently. So it's a case of having to reinvent yourself to some degree.
Yeah, and we'll be focusing, I'm sure, with you saying they're each very quotable. We'll be talking about them in more detail, I'm sure, on podcasts to come. But Keith Hill at Tranmere and Paul Tisdale, the new Bristol Rovers manager. Right, let's move on then to the main man, because there is plenty to discuss. So Manchester City's Pep Guardiola is the main focus this week. A big name, of course, the biggest name that we've done on this podcast. I mean, if you thought it wasn't going to get much bigger than John Sheridan, you were wrong. We're doing Pep this week, and his side lost 2-0 at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Saturday evening. Let's hear what Pep had to say after the game. So Pep Guardiola, whose side fell behind very early on against Spurs on Saturday evening. Now, obviously, Pep is seemingly universally loved still by City fans, despite the struggles that are currently taking place. But, Mike, you believe it's more of a case of Pep being, I guess, second-guessed a bit more now that he's probably played every team in the Premier League several times?
Yeah, I think what the main concern here is it's nothing to do with personality, and I don't think it's anything to do with anything that Pep is doing wrong, particularly why things are starting to go wrong now for City, and why I just think it's a case of everybody having caught up now. They all understand he had a huge edge when he first came to the country. I always think back, when I think of Guardiola, I always think back to a tweet from Bruce Millington, who was the editor of the Racing Post at the time, that when Barcelona beat Real Madrid 5-0 all them years ago, he said, Barcelona Pep Guardiola's invented a new sport and only Barcelona know how to play it. And that kind of sums it up. Nobody had a clue what they were dealing with. And even when he went to Germany, it's one thing to say, okay, there's this style of football that we've seen on the television and we might have come up against once in the European competition or something like that. Actually playing against it in competition is so different. And everybody's just got used to it now. I think everybody knows what they're dealing with, and you have to experience it once or twice at least before you can begin to work out ways of how do we actually deal with this. It's like, it's like reading a book in theory. You can understand the subjects in theory, but it's only in the firing line that you really understand what it is that you've got to do. And I just think there's so many players, and it's just filtering down further and further now, the level of player that understands this game and how to play against it. And that's basically the problem for Guardiola, is that it's not that, people will say cliches like he's been sussed out. It's like, yeah, people have caught up now. So now he's like every other football manager in that his way of playing is not something that people don't understand. It's like, it's more of a level playing field now than it's ever been for Guardiola in his career.
And I guess we talk about in the Football League, when we've analysed managers on the first 5 podcasts, we talked about whether managers are more man managers or more tactically astute. The Premier League attracts a calibre of manager in which are both. So the majority of the Premier League managers are tactically astute. They, of course, as well can afford hordes of scouts and teams of analysts and the data and everything else. So they've got all these resources, haven't they, to study Man City ahead of the game. I guess that really does help with sussing out what Pep is going to do.
Yeah, totally. And just the sheer calibre of player to get to that level. I think nowadays, on average, your average footballer takes care of their own personal development so much, or is so into their own, how can I improve that extra 1%? And technically, the standard of football has never been, but it's more of a non-contact sport now. And so technically players are so much more gifted. So whereas 10, 15 years ago, players couldn't defenders couldn't comfortably play out from the back and beat the press, at the highest level now, there's an abundance of defenders who can beat that press and who can play, technically execute what it is that you need to beat a Guardiola team. We're talking 12 years. He literally reinvented the game when he came back with these old principles in the new form. And we're talking 12 years now. It's a long time for footballers. It's half a generation of of footballers that have, the players that are playing against Guardiola teams now were toddlers when he was first bringing this game back, and they've evolved to understand this brand of football and how to play, in these kinds of matches.
You'll have watched obviously a lot more of Man City recently than I have, but have we seen Pep's style evolve? Have there been any obvious transitions, let's say this summer, or certainly since the season restarted after the COVID break in June? Have we seen anything change particularly, or is he sticking to the same principles, and that's why he's being sussed out?
I think this is where we get into the realm of personality now with Guardiola, because I think not necessarily. I don't think he changes a lot. I think his personality type is based around creating systems. It's about pattern recognition and finding how to build a system that can be sustainable well into the future, which is, it's about how to get the system to do most of the work. So then the player's talent can thrive and flourish, but the system always takes care of the general game plan. And what happens is talented players get to play with Guardiola, and where it can take time for ideas to set, like it takes a long time to get the fundamentals of his game plan in your mind as a player. But once they're there, there's so much you can do on autopilot, because so much of the control of the game is taken care of by the actual system itself. And this is the big edge that Guardiola's had. And now it's getting down to the details and the fine details and the concrete details of what you observe and what you see on the pitch, what is going wrong. The margins are getting finer and finer now for the difference that he can make. And this is not his skill set. He's being able to physically observe what's going on. It's interesting now, I'm a City fan. Most of my friends are all City fans. And to hear people now nitpicking about substitutions and things like that, well, that's not kind of understanding Guardiola. That is not Guardiola's skill strength, is to identify within a particular game what he can see that's going wrong and what needs changing. He's all about the system. He knows how his system should perform. And if it's creating chances and you're getting into areas, then in his mind, the system is performing. And he says it in the interview there. I don't feel like we're playing bad. I don't feel like we're doing anything wrong. And it's not. This is still the same City performance now that it was 4 years ago, 3 years ago. But now everybody else understands more. So you look at the XG ratio, you look at the shot data, nothing's really changed. It's the results that have changed. And, Tottenham this weekend have had 2 shots on target, scored 2 goals. It's all too familiar now as a pattern. And it's nothing to do with, oh, well, your luck will turn because, the XG says this and the stats say that. No, it's like people understand what they're doing now, very well drilled on how to do it. And, City, I believe, we're talking about a fantastic team that's probably going to get 2 points per game no matter what. But in terms of winning the big trophies, potentially have to reinvent themselves now because everybody knows how to play against this Guardiola system.
So in terms of City fans, you mentioned there a bit of nitpicking to do with substitutions. Is everybody still behind Pep? I can't imagine why they wouldn't be. But he signed a new contract, of course, this week. So the club are firmly behind him. Are all fans in agreement that the tide will turn?
I'm not sure about whether in agreement that the tide will turn. I think everybody's worried that everybody knows this is the end of a cycle, of his first cycle at City. 4 years, it's a block of time that we're familiar with that, this is when things can start to go a bit stale. And everybody's a bit worried about what comes next. We know it's the end of a cycle, but is there another cycle? Can he do another cycle? These are the big questions that everybody's asking. I think everybody's firmly behind him, but there is worry there. And that worry comes out when, results like this weekend, certain types of supporters will just always react. As soon as there's a result they don't like, they'll react and they say things that they don't really mean in the heat of the moment. I think for the most part, everyone's delighted that he signed a new contract. I know me personally, I'm delighted he signed it. I've got my big reservations now about where this might go, and it might be quite underwhelming potentially. And he says himself, contracts mean nothing if you don't get results. I wouldn't be surprised still if he went next summer. It really wouldn't shock me. But I don't think you just throw it away now without knowing whether he can produce a second cycle. So I'm absolutely delighted as a City fan that he signed a new contract. But I don't necessarily expect big things in that contract.
Just on a side note about Pep, do you believe that I believe this, that when people say, well, he can only work with top class players, he hasn't been tested because he's never operated with bang average players. I always think that's very unfair, because the reason why he's worked with those top class players is because he's that good and his system works that well. Whereas he's not going to get up and go, oh, actually, yeah, you're right, guys. There's a vacancy at Stevenage. I'll pop off and see if they'll let me down at the Lamex. He's always going to manage at the highest level. So actually asking him to actually suggesting that he's not a top coach because he hasn't worked with poorer players is, I think, grossly unfair. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit like comparing apples with oranges. It's one of those. There's a skill set that's required that 99% of managers cannot manage top players because they can't stimulate them. Now, if anything, Guardiola overstimulates them, and to the point where the brains become a bit frazzled if they're not careful. So, it's a completely different skill set at that level of the game. Your understanding of it has to be so great. I think the problem with Guardiola would be, because he's not as much of a people person as he is about the actual mechanics of the game. So you, first and foremost, you need to get players to understand the mechanics of the game on the level that he sees it. And that can take a hell of a long time with lesser players to relay those ideas and get these ideas across. So I would say there's possibly an element of truth that if you did drop him into League Two with League Two managers, he never played the game at that level, never mind managed it. So there's all sorts of things that would take him out of his personal comfort zone. But I don't think it's a stick. I think it's a bit of a nonsensical stick to beat him with, in the sense that, you can't achieve what he's achieved at that level of the game and then, try to turn it on its head and say that that's logic.
So he may not be as much of a people person as some of the other coaches in the Premier League, but he certainly knows how to get the best out of individuals. And of course, we've seen him in the past sort of giving individual team talks to the likes of Raheem Sterling and telling these players, this is what you need to do. This is how you improve. etc., etc. So there must be an air of there must be an element of the relationship with the players that he has is very strong. Is there a particular type of player as well that he sort of fares best with?
No, I do think. I mean, I guess in what I've said there, I've probably done him a bit of a disservice because I think he's brilliant at empathising with players, putting himself in the shoes of his players and understanding what emotions they'll be going through and what things are happening for them. And I think this is a very misunderstood part of Guardiola. When I say that he's not much of a people person, I guess what I mean by that is that his first focus is always the football. It's always about what's going on the pitch. But I think between matches, when he gets time to take stock, I think he understands the pressures that individual players are under. I don't think there's anything wrong with that side of things at all. I think that, he does build very strong relationships. And I think it's to his credit as well. A lot is said about the money he's spent and the fact that he can go out and buy any right back he wants, any left back he wants, and he can pick and choose his players off his own kind of fantasy of like, I'd like to have that player in my team. But I think it's possibly not said enough that how much he works with what he's inherited with. We all know that Joe Hart got bombed out because he couldn't play out from the back as a goalkeeper. That was a decision he made early. And I think that was something to do with personality as well and the type of character that Joe Hart was in the dressing room, possibly quite a distraction. But for the most part, there's players there. Sergio Aguero's a fantastic example who didn't know how to press at the beginning. He didn't know how to do that side of the game. And he's persevered and persevered and persevered. And, it's within his system and within what he's done in the time that he's been at City. Everybody's been given a fair chance to execute the game or look like they're trying to improve and execute in the game. And I think, that's basically... He's not buying for personalities, but he's taking into account everybody's personalities. He's able to empathise, but he can be quite ruthless when he needs to be.
And what's he like on the training ground on a day-to-day basis? I imagine he's there every step of the way. He's possibly standing right behind his coaches and making sure the players are 100% at it all the time.
Yeah, I think he's quite intense. I think that much is clear. You see the documentary on Amazon and things like that. He is very intense in the day-to-day, in the details. I think the whole point is, and this feeds into like the cost of specialisation. If you're particularly good at one thing, it means you're automatically weak at another. And we're saying about Guardiola's powers of observation from the touchline are not necessarily the best. That's why it's so important for him to hammer the details during the week on the training ground. Because this is about creating systems to compensate for your weaknesses. This is what a good system does. It's people of this personality type who create these systems. It's because they know on some level, at this part of things, I'm weak and this is not my particular strength. So I need to build a system that compensates for that never exposes me and puts me in that position. And this is why he's so intense on the training ground during the week, is because it's all about them little details of getting the overall system right.
So if he works hard on the training ground and getting the system right, does he have to say a lot pre-match, do you think? Is it more of a case of just sending the players out there and saying, right, we've been working on it all week, you know what you're doing, off you pop? I mean, he probably doesn't quite say it in, as prosaically as that, but he doesn't rile his players up necessarily, I imagine.
No, not particularly. I wouldn't say he's much of a motivator. I think this is potentially, it gets into the Champions League of where the players probably pick up nervous energy, if anything, because if there's any time he tries to motivate, it's those kinds of games. We've seen even City at the very best have not quite done themselves justice in certain Champions League, particularly the knockout games where it's death or glory. So, in terms of motivation, I don't think he's that way inclined. I think it's just by this stage, everybody should know what they're doing, but it's a system that's supposed to provide the edge, and it's not anymore. And this is the trouble. It's the edge is meant to come from the way we play. When we get it right, no one else can handle it. Well, now City can get it right, and teams can handle it. And this is the big problem that City have got now. So there's a certain, they have to reinvent themselves in some way. They have to do something not completely different, but more different than Guardiola's ever changed it up. And what we do know is from these Champions League games, when Guardiola does try to tweak or change things up, if anything, it leads to a lesser performance from his own players because they start to get, mixed messages, or they start to they feel the pressure of this must be an important game because now he's worrying about the opposition and doing, this tweak or that tweak. So these are the dilemmas he's got to face. It's a really tricky time he's about to encounter, I believe.
Yeah, he has received criticism, hasn't he, for maybe not messing about, but certainly tweaking for big games, fans questioning why, and like you say, players maybe just feeding off that nervous energy. So the inevitable question, Mike, is where does he go from here?
Well, his big motivation, I think, is the Champions League. I don't think there's any secret about that. He wants to win another Champions League. And this season will remain alive for as long as City remain in the Champions League. They're not out of the title race yet either. There's still second favourites to win the title. And, there's still plenty of opportunity for City to rack up more than 2 points per game, because that's ultimately what the title comes down to, is how many points per game you can rack up. But when it comes to the big matches against the fellow challengers, we saw again this weekend. We've seen it against Liverpool last season, and these bigger games are getting tougher and tougher for City to win now. And it will all be about the Champions League this season. I do worry that if a similar story plays out again, I wonder whether. I think Guardiola wants to see shoots of something new from the new players. So you Phil Fodens and the younger players that are coming through at City. They can't afford for it to be all about Kevin De Bruyne anymore. Because that's become the pattern lately. Is that there's such an over reliance on Kevin De Bruyne now that more players need to be emerging and taking games by the scruff of the neck. They need to show that they can win games without those big stars, without Aguero, without De Bruyne, or whoever's, Laporte if it's in defence. I just think he needs to change. I think if we ever going to get back to the City that City were 2 years ago, then there needs to be some level of reinvention, and I don't think Guardiola's necessarily equipped for that. And I really hope, as a City fan, he proves me wrong. But that's what we're going to have to see if City are ever going to get back to the level that they were 2 and 3 seasons ago.
So just quickly before we move on, we know all about his previous jobs. At any point during those jobs, did he have similar struggles and overcome them, or has this kind of period, let's call it a wobbly period, has this always kind of spelled the end for Guardiola?
I think the end of his time at Barcelona, there was so much more to it politically and what goes on behind the scenes. I think there's similarities. So he'll be drawing on that for experience in terms of what's happening on the pitch and how things are changing on the pitch now all of a sudden. That's where he'll be drawing his parallels from. But no, I don't think he's been through anything like this before. And I think this will be a defining period of his career. I think if he comes through this and rebuilds another team that was at the level that he, 2 or 3 seasons ago with City, or his great Bayern and Barcelona teams, then I think that, that will take his reputation onto a new level. Well, not for everybody. I think, nowadays it's whoever shouts loudest and what they want to shout. But in my opinion, I think that will take him onto another level again of, the imprint he leaves on the game as his legacy.
Well, we'll see. And to use an overused word on the news, this for the 2020, bit of an unprecedented time for Pep Guardiola over the next few weeks. Well, I'm sure I'll be keeping an eye on him. So losing 2-0 to Spurs, of course, yesterday was the 7th time that Jose Mourinho had actually beaten Pep Guardiola. And Spurs, Mike, I do believe were your pre-season tip.
Oh, yeah, that's right. For the anti-post, the outright preview for the Premier League on the Foxpunter was Tottenham to win the title at 60-1. So that's looking okay now. Obviously, still a lot of work to do. Liverpool needs to have a wobble yet before you even, really contemplate that. But yeah, it's nice to be on at such big prices. I think they're 11-2 now outright.
Yeah, Spurs looking good at the moment, and hopefully they can keep everyone fit as well for the sake of your pre-season anti-post bets. And Foxpunter.com, of course, is the place you can go for all of the match previews. You get XG tables, and of course you'll get the Thursday night hangout as well. And I believe, because we can't go down the shops, particularly here in the UK at the moment, a lot of people will be doing their purchasing on Black Friday online. And Mike, you've jumped aboard the Black Friday bandwagon.
Yeah, that's it. It's it's a bit of a crunch period, really. I had to build something because of the break in the international break. It gave me a little breather. You know, the marketing side, it can be really difficult when you're turning around Saturday, Tuesday. So yeah, I put it all into there's basically a special offer for Black Friday, huge discount. If you just go to foxpunter.com/podcast, there'll be an opt-in form there. Just enter your email address and all the details will be sent your way for how you can get on for the remainder of the season and be involved with the service.
Yeah, nice and simple. And of course, there's plenty of the season left as well. We might be at the end of November, but having started second week in September, still got loads of games to go across all of the divisions. So we're going to drop down a couple of divisions now, and we're going to look at League Two. One of perhaps the most surprising results of the weekend saw Tranmere batter Grimsby by 5-0. Ian Holloway, the manager of Grimsby, was particularly displeased with his side's performance, and he also had a few things to say to the local media. Well, believe it or not, that was an abridged version of the full interview after Grimsby's defeat to Tranmere. Explosive stuff from Ian Holloway, who we are used to hearing being very jovial and, of course, light-hearted as well with his throwaway one-liners, but clearly very upset at the performance and not enjoying the line of questioning from John Tonda.
No, I think this got quite personal in the sense that I think it got quite personal for Holloway on a very personal level. And I think there's a big backstory to this, and there's a lot to unpack here. Having followed his interviews at Grimsby since he got there, I think it's a big thing for him that I think he's chasing a dream. I think he wants to revamp the whole area. He mentioned the area within the interview. It's not just about getting the team back to life. It's about putting the area back on the map. And he's following this dream. It's trying to emulate what he did at Blackpool, I believe. And moving house is a big deal for him. You know, he's made so many references to that since the day he walked through the door, that he's moving house to be in the area. He's invested a lot into coming into this job. And COVID has knocked him for six. He really's not known how to deal with it. You know, the logistics side is not his strength. Of all the social distancing measures, everything that goes alongside it. All his best laid plans in the summer transfer market were blown out of the water by it because people didn't want to move to the area because it's such a remote outpost for so many footballers. And he knows that. It's the decision he's made himself to go to such a remote outpost because this is an area you can put back on a map. You put back on the map, this is a dream you can chase of, this is why he's dropped back down to League Two and wants to do this job. And this is all wrapped up in that answer. It's all about he's uprooted his whole life to go to this area, take on this job, house move in the middle of COVID, everything like that. And then suddenly, after one or two bad performances, his position in the role is being questioned. So you kind of begin to understand it on that level, and you're thinking, right, okay, maybe it's understandable then that he's reacted the way that he has because he's committed so much. He's gone in with his heart and soul and everything into this job, wanting to revive something that he's done in the past. And it's not gone anything like according to plan for him so far.
Yeah, you get the feeling he's 100% committed to the cause. But a few fans I noticed, certainly in the comments underneath the interview on social media, getting a bit frustrated about the amount of times he's wheeled out the COVID excuse. Obviously, as you say, yes, it's hit him for six, but as the interviewer pointed out, every club's been affected, every manager has been affected. But is Ian Holloway just not the sort of person who is very good when it's all of a sudden put on the back foot?
I think this is more to do with, it's more to do with his feelings and his emotions around the particular subject. I think generally speaking, he's good at lifting spirits in times of trouble and things like that. He's good at, lifting people's emotions. The problem with COVID is everything he went to Grimsby to do was to galvanise the fans, was to get in amongst the community, was to, basically immerse himself in the area. And the last thing you can do in the middle of a pandemic is immerse yourself in a new area that you've just moved to. So he must feel so detached from everybody and so detached from the situation, so helpless in the situation he now finds himself. And that question was coming because he has gone on about COVID too much, way too much. So it wasn't a surprise when that question came. But then you start to see the reaction with the entire backstory, and I think there's a lot more to it. I think this is, all of his frustration coming out that everything, all Holloway's strengths have been kiboshed by this, by lockdown and by everything that's followed. And we're not seeing the true Ian Holloway, and he must be wondering, I've moved my family up here, I've moved the area, and all the sort of the commitment I've made, and nobody's going to get to see the best of me. I think that's probably what's going through his head. And so he's very, very quickly been on the uptake that this is not good for me, and he can't let it go. He can't let it go. And I think, that's the big issue for him.
Yeah, and we've seen obviously him on TV before, making appearances on various highlight shows. We've seen him as a pundit. We've seen his quotes in newspapers thousands of times as well, and generally perceived as being very good with the media. But in the part of the interview that we didn't listen to there, the bit that's still on the cutting room floor, he mentioned that the papers, I think it was, or certainly the local radio station, had previously reported about one of his players on a misdemeanor, and then subsequently left. We're talking about Bilal Mojni, and he was unhappy with that already. So was that all factored in? Was he already on a bit of a campaign against the media, the local media?
I wouldn't say necessarily went in with the predetermination that I'm going to, I think the question came first and then it all bubbled up immediately. Because he was obviously upset about whatever had been asked of him during the week and what was said during the week. And he's made mistakes. And I think, when it comes to, you see, the thing is in the summer, he made it his policy to bring in non-league players. He made it sound at the time anyway that was a policy, because he's very good at understanding motivation and where the motivation comes from within a player. And he kind of identified early that if you recruit footballers that are used to getting paid, say, $5,000 a week, and you might have been able to get them $5,000 a week, I'm sure probably not that much at Grimsby, but, whatever the figure is, you're now paying them probably 60, 70% of that, because every club is. And his problem with that was that player's not going to be as motivated as they would have been previously. It's like if you recruit a player that's uprooted and moving to a new area later in the career, so they've seen the best days potentially, and then you're paying them less than probably what they're worth as well. This is a cocktail for disaster in terms of being able to motivate these players. And if Holloway can't motivate, then you take it, it's like you're taking away his right arm. So he understands this, and he was thinking, right, if I get non-league players, I can get non-league players to overperform, because we're going to be paying them what they used to getting paid anyway, but we're giving them a big break in the EFL. So that was his thinking. The more it comes out, though, he talks about his front four and he talks about how out of the depth some of the players are right now. I do think that possibly that was only part his policy. It was kind of forced on him, and then he made the best of it and turned it into a positive. And this is the way I'm going to spin it, because this is we need motivated players first and foremost. So, I think that's where it comes from. He's made mistakes with recruitment, but he's been on the back foot since day one. I don't feel like he's had anything to do on his own terms yet. He feels like, he's not representing himself very well because of it's just one thing after another that's been thrown at him. And the one overarching problem that it all comes back to is COVID. I think he would have fancied his chances of getting players to go to that, to go to that outpost and to all the. It was a difficult enough job as it was when he walked in. Throw COVID into the mix and double down on those problems. I think now he feels a bit overwhelmed by it all.
And we know about motivation being his key tool. What else does Holloway bring to the table?
Yeah, I think he can just lift the mood in any given situation. I think he knows he's very experimental in his personality. He likes to push people's buttons and see what reactions he gets. And this is the way he gets to understand everybody. So all the jovialness and all the jokiness in press conferences. And, there's been so many press conferences since he's been at Grimsby where he's been on top form. And he's been very entertaining. And he can just switch gears all of a sudden and, start ranting at the EFL or start ranting about something else. And he's just when he does this, it's not necessarily for the end means of what he achieves by saying these things. He's judging the reaction he gets out of people. He's trying to understand people and the dynamics of, what's really going on. Because further down the line, that will help him to know how to connect with people emotionally. And, I think that's basically what it is. He's just very playful when it comes to the human dynamic side. And ultimately, I think what he's always out to achieve is to get the right chemistry of an entire dressing room. You look at a manager, say, like Gareth Ainsworth and what he's done at Wickham, and you build this incredible thing that's bigger than the sum of its parts, that everybody's bought in and invested, and it's this great feeling that everybody gets from being part of something. That's what Holloway's trying to do at Grimsby. Without supporters, with all the social distancing measures, with players who aren't up to the level yet and things like that, it's virtually impossible for him to show the best of himself. And then he has a reporter that's, not who he feels he's probably connected with it's like he feels like he's being turned on by someone he thought he could trust, who he thought was possibly a close confidant or whatever it might be. So I think that's where he comes from. He's always this playful character trying to work out the human dynamics of people and what's really going to energize that person, what's really going to make them feel, bring the best out of everybody. He's always trying to bring the best out of people.
Well, as a Blackpool fan, obviously, I've still got very fond memories of Ian Holloway, and I've still got my 2010 commemorative mug as well with Holloway on the front, just the one chip in it at the moment. But at Blackpool, he obviously had a profound effect, but he was very much managing unfancied types. This was working on a Carl Oyston budget, which you don't know is very, very low, potentially minuscule. And he wasn't. I don't think he would has allowed the players that he wanted first and foremost, but he really made do with what he had, and it really worked. Obviously, in the end, things started to unravel a bit towards the end, and what he did do was bring in a lot of free agents, a lot of older players that were clearly, not at their best, not at their peak, and the numbers stacked up, and we ended up with a huge squad, many of whom featured for no more than 20 minutes across the entire duration of their stay at Bloomfield Road. He talks there about wanting to bring in experience now. Are we likely to see an influx of, let's call them waifs and strays?
It's a possibility, and I think this is where we get onto Holloway's biggest weakness, I suppose, is that when he's dealing with the emotional side of things, he's at his best. But the flip side of that is when he gets logical, when he's in a defensive state and he feels like, right, I've got to problem solve here, because things aren't working, then that's not necessarily a strength for him. And he's very experimental, as we say, so he'll experiment with his resources, and he will bring in players that, just kind of grab anyone kind of thing, and he'll rotate systems. When things are going well for Holloway, it's one system. He's talked about wanting to play 3-5-2 like Sheffield United at Grimsby. Now he's tinkering with systems. He's thinking how we're going to do things in different ways. And, when he gets into that state of tinkering with systems, that's an admission from him that things aren't working the way I want them to be working. And it's kind of like, not a last resort, but it's always come second to the emotional side. If he can't have the impact he wants to have emotionally and bring the best out of people, then he falls back on the logical problem-solving side, which isn't his strength, but he's capable of doing, but only in a defensive state, only in a, where you kind of in catch-up mode then, problems have already started before you start trying to fix them, as opposed to anticipating problems and getting on top of them.
And every now and again, of course, he has just those moments, doesn't he, where he throws in something unexpected. For example, with Blackpool, going back to his time there, he completely changed a winning side for a cup game and got fined for it in the end. But it completely took the momentum out of the season at that point as well. Occasionally, really sort of baffling substitutions as well. Is he perhaps guilty of maybe, let's say, either overthinking or just trying to do something different for the sake of it?
Yeah, and I think it starts when the problems have already started, potentially. So I think he's very quick on the uptake in being able to see patterns emerging before most people would understand that pattern's emerging. So he will, where we might be inclined to attach cause and effect. So it was the the rotation in the FA Cup that was the start of the problem, whereas Holloway might have seen a pattern coming before that, and that was a result of the pattern he was already seeing emerge, and then it looks to the outside world as though the patterns emerged afterwards. And this is what he is very good at, because he's very experimental and he's very playful, and he's always kind of messing around with the outer world and pushing people's buttons and things like that. He's very quick at seeing patterns emerge as soon as they emerge, and then trying to deal with them. The problem is when he's not got the buy-in or the emotional connection and all that side of things isn't working, and it becomes to problem solving. It's when he gets into the logical side of tactics and randomly bringing players in or doing anything on the football side that's kind of radical, and it's like he's just messing about. That's basically, he's already beginning to see problems himself that he thinks he needs to solve. Whether those problems are real or not might be a different story, but this is it. He sees patterns emerge very, very quickly and then feels like, right, I've got to do something. I can't just let this play out on its own.
And although many of the Grimsby fans commented on the fact that a lot of their players looked unmotivated and weren't particularly interested in that game at the weekend, he clearly does get players on side. Players clearly love working under him. Blackpool players. Brett Ormond came and said that when he first arrived, they walked in and he was putting out a 4-3-3 system using teddy bears, and they said, "Well, hang on a minute, what's this guy doing?" And then they sort of gradually learned that everything he was doing was a bit of an act, but it was coming from a good place. But players clearly enjoy Holloway's company. So is it potentially a bit of a worry then that there was, that you can have not much end product, but you need the fundamentally effort, don't you? And a lot of the Grimsby fans admitted that there wasn't much there on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's probably, if they're accusing a lack of effort, I think they're possibly, misdiagnosing the problem. I think, Holloway's quite convinced it's confidence. When confidence drains, then, a lot of players can go hiding. And I think that's possibly what's happened. And that's possibly what's upset him as well, to see that himself. And yeah, I just think, I don't think motivation is necessarily a problem. And I think Holloway will connect with these players given the right conditions, but it's the conditions that are the problem, in that, it's not giving him an opportunity to connect in the ways that he'd like to connect. He's not building these bonds and relationships that he normally would under normal circumstances. And I think the best thing that Grimsby can do is accept that this season's pretty much a write-off, but there needs to be some understanding that Holloway's there for the long term or not, I think, because I think if this mood festers, that Holloway thinks that I could be gone in 2 months if things don't turn, because everything's so reactionary nowadays. He's given all the conditions. It wasn't a disastrous start to the season until the last couple of results, but it only takes a couple of results nowadays, and then reporters are posing the questions, that you don't want to hear. It comes along so much quicker nowadays. So now there's this paranoia on Holloway's part that he might not be there for the long term. What's the point of all this? I've just uprooted and moved into the air, and it all comes back to that again. I think it's if any club needs clear the air talks and needs right, Holloway's here for the long term. Everybody needs to accept it. We need to write this season off and forget it. We need to understand that there's a lot of non-league players, and we need to just get through this campaign by hook or by crook and find out whatever we can. The difference you would see in Grimsby Town with fans back through the door, and every club can say this, that when we get the fans back through the door, I don't think anywhere will the impact be so profound if everybody stays on side with Holloway and then is allowed back into the ground, and then he can start getting in the community and just being the type of character that he is.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet he can't wait to throw himself back into it all as well once hopefully fans are allowed back in the stadium. Mike, I could talk all day about Ian Holloway and bore you with all the details of his time by the seaside, but I won't. I'll just go and have a cup of tea from my mug instead and think about that glorious playoff final. And while I do that, I'd like to hear about any other business. What else caught your ear this week in the post-match world?
Well, a big running theme has been the 5 substitutes rule being reinstated. Most managers talked about that. Lots of interesting stuff to pick up from a personality type perspective as well, because, this is about resources. and how you use your resources. And some managers are better equipped than others. But what really took me was Gareth Ainsworth. I was very impressed with Gareth Ainsworth in the sense that he voted for the 5 substitutes, even though it goes against Wycombe's advantage. Wycombe haven't got the 5 substitutes that other teams have in terms of quality. But he voted for it because it's the right thing to do. It's, the players' welfare and things like that. And I thought it was very noble of Holloway to come out and say, that basically common sense has prevailed. This has to happen in these schedules. We need to be able to, give more minutes to more players and not put the players under so much pressure. So I just thought that was impressive from Ainsworth to be so sort of honest. And he is a manager that isn't necessarily equipped to deal with resources. That's not necessarily his skill set. So there's loads of reasons why you could have, not voted for this and look for a competitive advantage. And I think it just shows the difference between Ainsworth on the pitch, because some of the things his teams can do during those 90 minutes and the dark arts and everything he was remembered for in his career. But it just goes to show off the pitch, he's such a different character. And I think if you'd have asked that question to Gareth Ainsworth while a match was being played during the 90 minutes, there's no chance he would have voted for 5 substitutes.
Yeah, well, they got a good point yesterday, though, against Brentford, of course. Wycombe, a 0-0 draw at home to Brentford, a game in which apparently Brentford created very little. So his side are doing really well to stifle the opposition. And now that he's got 5 subs to choose from, be interested to see how many times across the course of the season he utilises all 5, won't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the big theme for them as well is Bayo Akinfenwa. He started the 90 minutes, and obviously that's one substitution that even if Akinfenwa's not fit, he will be on the bench every week because of how it gets into the opposition heads that he might come off the bench, especially when there's 5 subs. So you're already sort of making the opposition think about their substitutions just because he sat in the other dugout.
Yeah, indeed. We'll keep an eye on Akinfenwa's movements. I mean, how could you not? We'll be keeping a close eye on those going forward. And I'm sure as well we'll be profiling Gareth Ainsworth in more detail in future episodes. If you'd like to go back and listen to any of our previous podcasts, you can find them on Spotify and, of course, on iTunes and anywhere else where you get your podcasts too. Keep an eye on our Twitter feed as well throughout the week, and we'll hopefully point you in the direction of some of the more interesting post-match interviews from those Tuesday and Wednesday night games. But Mike, as ever, thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure, Jack. Thanks a lot.
And we'll be back with more managerial musings in 7 days' time.